There is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you stop checking your phone every 5 minutes. When their name on the screen no longer makes your chest tighten. When you can hear their voice in a memory and feel nothing. Not hatred, not longing, just stillness. That moment is not an accident. It is not luck. It is not something that simply happens to you after enough time passes. It is a skill. And 2,000 years ago, a group of philosophers already knew exactly how to build it. Today, you're going to learn how to do what an emperor, a slave and a statesman all mastered. How to let someone go without losing yourself in the process. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the place where ancient philosophy meets modern struggle. Every week, we take the timeless teachings of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, and we translate them into tools you can actually use in your relationships, your career, and the quiet battles you fight inside your own mind. If you're new here, consider subscribing, because what you're about to learn isn't just a video. It's a shift in how you see every person who has ever had power over your peace. Let's begin. Somewhere in your life right now, there is a person who occupies more space in your mind than they deserve. Maybe it's an ex-partner. Maybe it's a friend who betrayed you. Maybe it's a parent, a business partner, a person who left without explanation. Or worse, a person who stayed but never truly gave you what you needed. You know the feeling. You're doing something completely unrelated, making coffee, driving to work, lying in bed at 2 a.m., and suddenly, there they are, uninvited, occupying your thoughts like a tenant who refuses to leave. This is not weakness. This is attachment. And attachment, the Stoics understood, is one of the most dangerous forces a human being can carry, because it hands the keys of your inner peace to someone who may never even think of you again. Let me tell you about Elena. Elena spent 4 years with a man who promised her forever and delivered inconsistency. He would disappear for days, then return with flowers and apologies, so convincing she'd forget the wound was ever there. When it finally ended, not with a dramatic fight, but with a slow, quiet fade, Elena expected relief. Instead, she got haunted. She would see his face in strangers on the subway. She'd hear a song and her whole body would flinch. 6 months later, she was still checking his social media at midnight, still constructing arguments in her head for conversations that would never happen. Elena wasn't in love anymore. Not really. What she was experiencing was something the Stoics diagnosed with startling precision. Nearly 2,000 years before modern psychology gave it a name. She was in the grip of an irrational judgment. Epictetus, who was born a slave and later became one of the most influential philosophers in Roman history, taught something radical for his time, and honestly, radical for ours too. He said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of things." Read that again. It wasn't the man's absence that was torturing Elena. It was the story she kept telling herself about that absence. It was the meaning she had attached to his silence, the identity she had built around being his, the imagined future she still mourned, even though it had never been real to begin with. This is the first truth you need to understand before we go any further. Emotional attachment to a person who has hurt you, left you, or disappointed you is rarely about the person anymore. It's about the narrative you've built around them. And narratives can be rewritten. If you've ever caught yourself replaying a conversation that ended months or even years ago, type "I understand" in the comments below. I want to know how many of you are walking through life carrying a conversation that already ended. At the center of Stoic philosophy sits a single idea, so simple it sounds almost too obvious to matter, and yet almost no one actually lives by it. It's called the dichotomy of control. Epictetus divided all of existence into 2 categories: things that are up to us and things that are not. Your judgments, your desires, your actions, your effort, your character, these are up to you. Other people's feelings, other people's choices, whether someone loves you, whether someone stays, whether someone understands you, whether someone apologizes, these are not up to you. They never were. James ran a small consulting business with his best friend since college. a man named Marco. For 9 years, they built something together. Late nights, shared risk, mutual trust. Then, in a single boardroom meeting, Marco voted alongside 2 investors to remove James from operational control of the company they had built together. James did not see it coming, and for months afterward he replayed it. He drafted furious texts he never sent. He rehearsed confrontations in the shower. He wanted, desperately, for Marco to feel the weight of what he had done. He wanted an apology. He wanted Marco to lie awake the way James was lying awake. But here's the devastating truth James eventually had to face. Marco's guilt, or lack of it, was never within James's control. James could not force remorse into another man's heart. He could not compel an apology. He could not make Marco understand the betrayal the way James experienced it. Every ounce of energy James spent hoping for that outcome was energy poured into a bottomless well. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled the most powerful empire on earth, and who arguably had more reason than almost anyone in history to demand the world bend to his will, wrote something staggering in his private journal. A text never meant for publication called Meditations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Think about the audacity of that statement coming from an emperor, a man who could command legions, execute enemies, reshape borders, and even he understood that the only kingdom he truly ruled was the one inside his own skull. If Marcus Aurelius could not control the hearts of men, what makes us believe we can control whether an ex-lover misses us, whether a former friend regrets what they did, whether a parent finally sees us the way we've always needed to be seen? Emotional detachment begins the moment you stop trying to control the uncontrollable. It's not about not caring. It's about redirecting your caring toward the only thing that has ever actually been yours to shape, your own response. This is why some people seem almost supernaturally calm after devastating losses, while others are destroyed by minor slights. It's not that the calm ones feel less. It's that they've stopped fighting battles that were never winnable in the first place. The Stoics were, above all, practical. They didn't just diagnose the problem, they built a roadmap out of it. And through their writings, we can trace 3 distinct stages that almost everyone passes through on the road from painful attachment to genuine peace. Stage 1, fusion. This is where Elena began. In this stage, you cannot distinguish between your identity and the other person's presence in your life. Their opinion of you feels like fact. Their absence feels like a missing limb. You check your phone not because you're curious, but because some part of you still believes your worth is verified by their attention. If you're in stage 1 right now, understand this. You are not broken. You are human. Fusion is what happens when the brain, wired for millennia to survive through social bonds, treats separation as a literal threat to survival. Ancient humans who were cast out of the tribe often died. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a breakup and a genuine emergency. That's why heartbreak feels physically like an actual wound. Stage 2, resistance. This is where James lived for months. In this stage, you know intellectually that you should let go. You've perhaps even read 100 quotes about it. But emotionally, you are still at war. You alternate between anger and longing. You tell your friends you're totally over it, while composing a mental speech for a confrontation that will likely never happen. Resistance is exhausting because it requires constant vigilance. You are simultaneously trying to move forward and refusing to fully release the past. It's like trying to walk while holding a rope tied to something behind you. You can move, but every step costs double the energy. Stage 3, sovereignty. This is the destination, not numbness, not pretending you never cared. Sovereignty. Here's a story that captures it perfectly. The story of Marco, a man who decades ago lost his entire family fortune to a business partner who betrayed him in a way eerily similar to what happened to James. But Marco's story ends differently. Years later, when a journalist asked Marco if he still resented the man who ruined him financially, Marco reportedly said something like this: "He took my money. I decided a long time ago he wouldn't also take my peace." That single sentence contains the entire philosophy we're exploring today. Marco didn't pretend the betrayal never happened. He didn't claim he felt nothing. He simply refused to let the event continue extracting a toll from him years after it had ended. He separated the injury from the ongoing suffering. The injury was real and it was over. The suffering was optional, and he declined the invitation to keep paying it. This is what the Stoics called apatheia, often mistranslated as apathy, but which actually means freedom from being controlled by destructive passions. Not the absence of feeling, the absence of being enslaved by feeling. Which stage are you in right now? Fusion, resistance, or sovereignty? Comment below with the word that describes where you are today. Naming it is the first step toward moving past it. Here is something that will sound uncomfortable at first, but stay with me, because it is one of the most liberating practices in the entire Stoic tradition. The Stoics practiced imagining loss before it happened. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Seneca, writing to his friend Marcia, who was still grieving her son years after his death, said something that shocks people when they first hear it. He who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive. Seneca wasn't being cold. He was teaching a technique. The idea is this: when we form attachments to people, to relationships, to circumstances, we unconsciously begin to believe they are permanent. We build our identity on top of them as if they are bedrock. But nothing external is bedrock. Not people, not relationships, not even our own bodies. By periodically reminding yourself, gently, not obsessively, that every person in your life is mortal, is free, is capable of leaving, changing or disappointing you, you do something remarkable. You love them more freely, precisely because you're not gripping them out of fear. Elena eventually discovered this practice almost by accident. A therapist suggested she write down, honestly, all the ways the relationship had actually been difficult, not to demonize her ex, but to see clearly. She realized that for 2 of those 4 years, she had already been grieving a version of him that didn't fully exist. She had fallen in love with his potential, with the man he promised to become, more than the man who actually stood in front of her. When she applied premeditatio malorum in reverse, asking herself, if I had known on day 1 exactly how this would end, would I still recognize the good that existed alongside the pain? Something shifted. She stopped mourning a fantasy. She started grieving the real, smaller, more specific things. The way he laughed at her jokes, the road trips, the ordinary Tuesday mornings. Real grief, it turns out, is far more survivable than grief for a fantasy that never existed. This is the paradox at the heart of Stoic detachment. You must first see the relationship exactly as it was, not better, not worse, before you can release it fully. Most people get stuck because they're either idealizing what they lost, stage 1 thinking, or demonizing it entirely, a trap disguised as healing, but which keeps you just as tethered through anger as you once were through love. True release requires clear sight, not rose-colored, not scorched earth, just truth. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire that would eventually crumble, that he knew intellectually could not last forever, wrote to himself constantly about impermanence, not to feel sad but to feel free. Nothing happens to anybody that he is not fitted by nature to bear. He trained himself daily to hold every relationship, every title, every possession, with an open hand. Not because he didn't value them, he clearly did, deeply, but because he understood that gripping tightly to anything temporary guarantees suffering when it inevitably changes. Philosophy without practice is just poetry, so let's get practical. Here are 4 techniques drawn directly from Stoic writings that you can start using today. Technique 1, the view from above. Marcus Aurelius frequently practiced what modern psychologists now call cognitive distancing, but he called it the view from above. He would imagine himself rising above his immediate circumstances, seeing his life as a tiny speck within the vastness of the world, of history, of the cosmos. Try this the next time thoughts of that person consume you. Imagine rising above your city, above the country, above the planet. See yourself as one human, in one moment, out of billions of humans across thousands of years, all wrestling with the exact same ache you're feeling right now. This isn't meant to make your pain feel insignificant. In a dismissive way, it's meant to right-size it, to remind you that this moment, however consuming, is a single frame in a much longer film. James used this technique specifically before difficult days at the office, when he knew he might run into Marco. Before walking in, he'd spend 60 seconds imagining the entire scenario from 1,000 feet up. Two small men in one small building, in one small city, on one small planet. It didn't erase his pain, but it shrank the moment down to a size he could actually carry. Technique 2, the reserve clause. The Stoics taught that we should pursue our goals, including the goal of reconciliation, connection, or closure, while silently attaching what they called a reserve clause, fate permitting. This means I will act with full effort and good intention, but I release my grip on the specific outcome. Elena used this when she finally decided to write a letter to her ex, not to send, but to process. She wrote with full honesty, expressing everything she needed to say. But before she began, she reminded herself, I'm writing this for my own clarity. Whether he ever reads it, understands it, or responds to it is not something I control, and I release that outcome now. This single mental adjustment transforms desperate, grasping communication into grounded, dignified expression. Technique 3. Negative visualization applied to freedom. Here's a twist on premeditatio malorum, specifically for people trying to detach from someone who still occupies too much mental space. Ask yourself honestly, if this person walked back into my life tomorrow, fully remorseful, exactly as I remember them at their best, would returning to that dynamic actually serve the life I'm trying to build now? Often, when people answer this honestly, they realize the fantasy of reunion is more comforting than the reality would be. Elena, when she asked herself this question truthfully, admitted that even in his best moments, the inconsistency that defined the relationship would likely have returned. The fantasy she was grieving was not a fantasy of him. It was a fantasy of a version of him that had never actually consistently existed. Technique 4. The discipline of assent. Epictetus taught that between any external event and our emotional reaction to it, there exists a gap, a space where we choose whether to assent to a thought or reject it. When a memory of that person arrives uninvited, and it will, because minds are not obedient on command, you do not have to fight it, suppress it, or spiral into it. You simply notice it and choose not to assent to the story it's trying to tell you. That happened. It hurt. I am not required to relive it right now. This is remarkably different from suppression, which the Stoics did not advocate. Suppression buries feeling, and buried feeling festers. The discipline of assent instead says, feel the wave, acknowledge it honestly, and then choose deliberately not to build a house on top of it. Practiced daily, these 4 techniques don't eliminate memory. They don't erase history. What they do is far more valuable. They return authorship of your emotional life to you. There's a misconception worth addressing directly, because I know some of you are thinking it right now. Doesn't all of this just turn a person cold? Doesn't detachment mean becoming someone who no longer loves deeply, no longer risks vulnerability, no longer opens their heart? This is perhaps the most important distinction in this entire video, so listen closely. Stoic detachment is not the absence of love. It is love without dependency. Marcus Aurelius loved his family, his friends, his empire, deeply, by every historical account. Seneca wrote some of the most tender letters on grief and friendship in all of ancient literature. Epictetus, a former slave, taught extensively on duty, community, and human connection. None of these men were advocating for isolation or emotional numbness. They were advocating for a very specific kind of strength, the ability to love fully without needing that love returned in a specific way, at a specific time in order to feel whole. Consider Marco again, the man who lost his fortune. He didn't become cold after his betrayal. In the years that followed, those who knew him described him as more present, more generous, more capable of deep connection than before. Why? Because he was no longer loving from a place of fear and grasping. He had learned that his peace did not depend on any external outcome, which paradoxically freed him to love other people more fully, without the constant anxious undertow of needing something back to feel secure. This is the deepest secret of Stoic detachment. It doesn't shrink your capacity to love. It removes the desperation from your loving. People who have not done this inner work often love in a way that is actually a disguised form of self-protection, clinging tightly because releasing feels like death. People who have done this work love in a way that looks almost effortless, because they've already made peace with the reality that nothing external was ever guaranteed to begin with. Elena, a full year after her breakup, eventually entered a new relationship. Friends who knew her before and after described her as a different person, not colder, but calmer. She still felt deeply. She still cried at movies, still got excited planning trips, still felt butterflies. But she no longer needed her partner to be perfect in order to feel secure. She had learned the hard way that her sense of self could not be outsourced to another person's consistency. Let's return one final time to Elena and James, two people, different struggles, walking the same ancient path. A year and a half after her breakup, Elena found herself at a small independent bookstore, the kind with creaking wooden floors and the smell of old paper. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. She picked up a worn copy of Meditations, flipping idly through pages someone else had once underlined in pencil. At the same bookstore, coincidentally, James had stopped in after a long day, the kind of day that, 18 months earlier, would have sent him spiraling into resentment about Marco, about the company, about the injustice of it all. Instead, he found himself simply browsing, at peace, having long since made peace with a chapter of his life that had once threatened to define him entirely. They didn't know each other. They never spoke. But if you had asked either of them, separately, what changed in their lives over that year and a half, they would have described almost the same internal journey, from fusion to resistance, to something that finally resembled sovereignty. This is the quiet, unglamorous truth about emotional detachment. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. There is no single dramatic moment where you wake up healed. It arrives the way morning arrives, so gradually that you don't notice the exact instant the darkness became light. You simply look up one day and realize the sun is already high in the sky. If you take only one thing from everything we've discussed today, let it be this. Every person who has ever hurt you, left you, disappointed you, or failed to love you the way you deserved, they were never actually in possession of your peace. They only ever had the power you handed them, and what has been handed away can always, eventually, be reclaimed. This is not a call to bitterness. It is not a call to build walls so high that no one can ever reach you again. It is a call to something far more difficult and far more rewarding, to love people fully while refusing to outsource your inner stability to their choices. Marcus Aurelius, in the final years of his life, facing war, plague, and the slow decline of everything he had worked to build, wrote perhaps the most quietly devastating line in all of Meditations. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Not wait for others to become good so that you can finally feel safe. Not hold your peace hostage until the world treats you fairly. Simply be steady, be whole, regardless of what anyone else chooses to do with the love you once offered them. That figure from the beginning of this video, the one who no longer feels his chest tighten at a name on a screen, he's not special. He's not different from you in any fundamental way. He simply did the work, day after day, thought after thought, choosing sovereignty over suffering, one small decision at a time. You can do the same, starting today, starting with the very next thought that arrives uninvited. If this video gave you even a small piece of the peace you've been searching for, that's exactly why this channel exists. Every week we dig into the ancient wisdom that has helped millions of people carry unbearable things and come out the other side whole. If you're still watching, still here with me at the end, comment one word below that describes the peace you're working toward. I read these and I promise you, you are not alone in this. Hit subscribe if you want more of this kind of clarity in your life. Like this video if it spoke to something you needed today, and share it with someone who is still carrying a chain they don't realize they're free to put down. Until next time, this has been Wisdom of the Stoics. Go build your inner citadel. No one can take it from you but you.